Will you over in China in your other roles?
So we're going to start the video, I guess, and we'll get to the learning. Hello, hi, Gloria. Welcome to the class. This class has been going on for, we had a break, but it's been going on for a month or two. So we're actually not going to start from the beginning because we did that already. We're holding page 5A of the Tractate Sukkah. Obviously, the Tractate Sukkah, you can imagine, talks about Sukkot, the holiday of Sukkot, the laws of building a Sukkah, what you can use as the covering, the schach. It talks about the laws of the lulav, the etrog, and other things that went on in the temple during the holiday of Sukkot. So the first Mishnah that we learned, that I'll go over because it's significant, because everything that we're going to learn for the next bit is based on that Mishnah. The Mishnah talks about the first few basic laws when it comes to building a sukkah. And the first law talks about is that a sukkah cannot be higher than 20 amos. Amos in English would be cubits. They're about 18 plus inches. So a sukkah can't be higher than 20 cubits. We learned another law that it has to be at least 10 tfachim, which are hand breadths. Like your hand, the breadth of your hand, it's 10 hand breadths. That's the minimum height of a sukkah. That's another thing we learned. And then another law we learned was that it has to have a minimum of 3 walls, which we already read that it doesn't mean 3 full walls. It means 2 full walls and a bit, which we'll get to that later. The Gemara will get to that later. And then another law, it says that the shade that the schach, the covering, is providing has to be more than the sunlight that it lets through, which we didn't discuss yet either. But those were the laws of the Mishnah. So far, we learned the first big chunk was talking about about this idea that it can't be higher than 20. Where does it come from? But the next, what we started learning recently was about the fact that it cannot be, that it has to be at least 10 tefachim, at least 10 habas high. So that's what we started talking about, and we asked, where does this come from? Where do we know that a sukkah has to be at least 10 handbreadths, 10 tefachim high? So what we learned last time, this was the last session, so we're really catching you up quick. The last session that we learned was that there's a verse that says that God left earth to man, and the heavens are for him. And it says that God never comes down into the actual world, and man doesn't go up into heaven. Even though it says Moses was on Mount Sinai and he went up to heaven, he never went to the actual heaven. And we learned that it was, what does that mean? Because God came down to Mount Sinai. Moses, we said, went up. Elijah went up. So the answer always was that there's 10 handbreadths of distance that there always was. Meaning God, he came down to this world, but he was only above 10 handbreadths. He never entered within the 10 handbreadths of earth. And same thing with the heavens. We learned that idea of 10 handbreadths, we said, from the ark. The ark was 9, it says it was an amma and a half tall, a cubit and a half tall, which a cubit is, in handbreadths, a cubit is 6 handbreadths. So an amma and a half is 6 plus another half is 3 is 9. So it's 9 handbreadths tall. And then there was a cover to the ark in the temple. And that cover, the Gemara is that's what we're figuring out. How tall, how thick, how tall was this cover for the ark? And the conclusion we're trying to get to is that it should be a tefach thick, a tefach tall, and therefore the ark itself will be 10 tefachim tall. And it says that God spoke to Moshe from on top of the ark, and if the ark is 10 tefachim, it means that God came to the 10 tefachim mark and not lower. So that shows us that what's a significant area is 10 tefachim, and therefore the sukkah we said has to be a minimum of 10 tefachim. That's what we're holding in the Gemara. But the discussion at length now is this cover for the ark. We're trying to get to that it should be a tefach thick. But how do we know that the cover was a tefach thick? The Torah doesn't give a measurement. It gives a measurement for the length of the ark, the height of the ark, but for the cover of the ark, it doesn't get into that. And that's what the discussion is surrounding about. So we already learned one opinion of where it comes from, but today we're going to start a new opinion of how we know that the cover was a tefach thick. So we're on the bottom of 5a. Sorry that I don't have the Talmud to show you. The best would be if I can send it to you. So Gloria, if you can email me or write in the chat a way for me to send you the Talmud, and for next time you'll have the text. I also, like what I do with Michael here is that he's able to read it before, so he knows like what we're going to talk about. He knows what questions that he has about what we're learning, and that's obviously the best way to do it. So I definitely love to send it to you, and then you could, and I'll tell you what we're doing the next time, and you can prepare it on your own. And then when we actually learn about it, it will be a lot more helpful. Okay, amazing. So I see your email there, and unfortunately this time I won't be able to send it to you, but I'll send it to you before the next class. Okay, so we're on the bottom of 5a. This is Rav Huna. He's going to give his own source for how we know how thick the cover for the ark was. Now, we learned in the last session, Michael, we learned a very important principle that when you're unsure of a measurement of an amount, you always choose, very good, we always choose the smallest amount. We don't overreach, we try to underreach, reach for what we think it is, but never overreach. The words in Hebrew are tafas the meruba like tafasta. Tafas means to grab. So when you're grabbing something, I mean, like you're unsure, you're just like reaching out and grabbing. Don't grab meruba. Don't grab the more, the higher amount. Rather, tafas the muat. Muat means like ma'at, a little. Grab the lesser amount. That's a big principle you're gonna keep on hearing in today's. We heard it already a few times last time, but it's gonna keep coming up here also. So he says like this. Rav Huna says that there's a verse it talks about the cover of the ark, and it says upon the face of the ark cover on the east. So it's talking about the east side of the ark, but it says that the face of the cover. So he says, that's already a clue to how thick, how tall the cover was. If it was a face, so we need to find out what a face is, what's the size of a face, and then we can know how the cover of the ark was. That's what Rav Huna says. But now the Gemara is going to go on to figure out what exactly size space is it referring to. That's going to be the discussion today, the beginning at least. So it says like this. First step, the Gemara says, is a face. When we talk about a human face, it was known that it's not smaller than a tefach, a hand breadth. That's the classic size for a face. It would be a tefach. I mean, I don't want that. I guess my face is a little bigger than a tefach, but no one's face is smaller than a tefach. That is the principle. So if it describes the ark cover as having a face, it means it was a tefach. So the Gemara asks right away, maybe it means a face like a very big face. There's a certain bird. It's like more of a legendary bird. It's spoken about in somewhere else. Like a very, very big bird. Rashi quotes the other Gemara, which talks about it, and it's actually interesting. This will be interesting, Michael. I don't know if you heard about this, but a lot of people like to they'll take things from the Talmud and they'll say, "Oh, you see, Talmud was ahead of its time in regards to science and things like that," and or even like prediction. Like the Talmud was predictionary. So like one of the things they say is with regards to planes and atom bombs. Listen, the Talmud knew about the atom bomb before 1,500 years before it was introduced. So what does it talk about? I don't remember clearly that piece of the Talmud, but basically it describes a bird, and to bring the Talmud trying to bring out how big this bird is, trying to bring out the point. So it says, if this bird would drop its egg on Earth while it was flying, it would destroy. Let me just double check. 60 cities in one shot. It would destroy 60 cities in one shot. That's what the Talmud says. So people always try to, they like to say, oh, the Talmud knew about the atom bomb before. And like when it talks about a bird, it really means it's referring to a plane, just that. In the times of the Talmud, they wouldn't understand what a plane is. So it says bird. And then the egg, they wouldn't understand a bird dropping a bomb. It wouldn't make sense. So it talks about an egg and the destroying 60 cities all in one shot. That's just interesting fact that people like to use that quote from the Talmud for that. But the point back to us, what we're saying is that we're trying to figure out again the size of a face, and it says, oh, you know what? You're saying that we're talking about a human face. Who said? Maybe it's talking about the face of this bird, which is massive, way more than a handbreadth. Maybe that's what we're referring to. So right away, what's the answer to that? How do we know we're not referring to such a bird? Very good, because we have the size of a human face, we have the size of this bird. We always choose the smaller amount, and therefore it cannot be referring to this bird. That's right away the answer. And you'll see that again. It'll come up a few times. Okay, so the Gemara moves on. Maybe it's referring to a face. If according to this principle, you always look for the smaller amount. So there's a bird, tzipora, which is very right here in the notes. Maybe it was a hummingbird. The point is a bird, very very small bird with a very very small face, which is way less than a handbreadth. Maybe that's what it's referring to. If you're saying we have to look for the smallest amount, so when it says face, maybe it's referring to a face of a tiny bird. So for that, the Gemara says, you know what? There's something called, this is another tool. I mentioned to Michael this idea of having tools for your toolbox, your Gemara learning toolbox, certain principles, skills that come up often that will help you understand what's going on. So there's an idea called a Gzera Shava. That's the Hebrew word, Gzera Shava. What's a Gzera Shava? It's that when you have two words that are the same word or very, very similar, same idea of the word for sure, and they're in two different verses, two different places, but it's the same word. So that opens up an opportunity to learn out certain laws or principles from one verse to the other verse. So, for example, here I'll just use this example. It says pnei. Pnei means panim, face. And then you have in another verse, you have this word pnei. It's in the verse talks about Yitzchak, Isaac, and it says from the face of his father. So it uses that same word face. So we learn out if the face, when it talks about Isaac, it was talking about a human face, right? So it's talking about a human face. It's talking about Isaac. So to here, when it says the word face, it's referring to a human face, which would conclude a handbreadth, and it's not referring to a bird, a tiny bird. That's the idea. Now, so this idea of learning out from one, since it's the same word, we can learn out from one verse to another. It's called Gzera Shava. Now, I just want to say, it doesn't mean like, oh, because there's tons of times you have similar words and verses in the Torah. You can't just do it anytime. What I remember hearing was it was passed down. These words are open for this idea of Gzera Shava. I mean, they said, oh, this word, let's say, for example, here, this word panim, face, and this verse was open for this type of learning technique. Not all, basically, in other words, unless you have passed down in tradition, this word is up to this learning technique, you cannot do it. You can't just make up your own Gzera Shavas. That's the idea. You can't make up your own Gzera Shava. It has to have been passed down to you that this word is open for Gzera Shava, and then you can learn out whatever you were trying to learn out from there. So that's just, again, a tool for your toolbox, this idea of Gzera Shava. So again, so the Gemara asks, again, maybe we're talking about it. The face of the cover of the ark was as small as a tiny bird's face. Well, how do you know it was a human face? So we're answering that it uses the word face here. It uses the word face when it talks about Isaac. So just like there, it's a human face. So too here, it would be referring to a human face. That would be, that's what the Gemara answers. So the Gemara says, if so, then it says the word face by other things besides for humans. And it gives an example of it's talking about an angel. It says, as one sees the face of God, and it's referring to an angel. So seemingly, angel, the Gemara assumes, I didn't get a chance to look into it, but the Gemara assumes that an angel's face is bigger than a hammer. Yeah, it seems that it's big. So if we're saying that, we learn out face, the word face from a different time, it uses the word face. So maybe you should learn it out from the angel's face, which is bigger than a hammer. How do you know it's talking about a human face? That's the Gemara. The Gemara is trying to figure out how we know we're talking about a human face. Say maybe it's this bird, that. The Gemara always has an answer. Okay. So we say, how do we know that it's not referring to angel face? Back to the principle we said before. Remember, anytime when you're going to try to offer a bigger amount, a higher amount, the Gemara is going to answer, oh, we choose the smaller amount, not the higher amount. So yeah, you're right. It says the word face when it comes to angels, also not only with humans, but which one's the smaller amount? Humans. So we're going to decide that it's referring to a human face and not an angel's face, because that's the smaller amount. So you see, again, we use that principle again. So the Gemara says, you know what? There's another time it uses the word face when it's talking about the chruvim. How do you say it in English? The cherubs. Those were the angel-looking forms on top of the ark, and it was known that those faces were seemingly less than a tefach. Less than a handbreadth. So we're saying maybe we should learn out from those faces, the faces of the cherubs, because those were less than a handbreadth. So it would fit with the principle of choosing the lesser amount, and we should learn from there. That's what the Gemara proposes. So I'll tell you why the Gemara thinks that it's less than a handbreadth, because if we think about it, it's how tall were the cherubs? I don't know if you remember, but they were themselves were 10 handbreadths tall, and which is very small compared to a human being. A human being, they say a typical human being is 3 amos, which is about 5 point something feet. 10 handbreadths is not even 2 amos, so it's a lot smaller. So proportionally, if a cherub is, let's just say half the height. I don't know exactly what, but some significant amount less of a human being. So the face also proportionally should be less. When it comes to I know I'm not an artist, but I don't know anything about art. But my wife is an artist, and one of the things I learned from her is that you have a big skill and an important thing to do when it comes to art is to make sure everything's proportionate. That's one of the hard things of art is making sure that everything's proportionate to what you're doing, what you're drawing. So in this case, the face, if it would be proportionate to the size of the cherub, it should be a lot smaller than a handbreadth. So again, and that would be a smaller amount. So that would work with the principle. Choose the smaller amount. Why don't we choose to say that when it speaks about the face of the cover of the ark, is referring to the size of the face of the cherub? So the answer is we have a tradition. Again, meaning it was passed down that the size of the face of the cherubs were 1 tefach, which the conclusion sounds like that it was not proportionate. Even though it was a smaller looking form, the face was still as same size as a human face. It was a tefach. It was a handbreadth big, and therefore, and the Gemara says, you know what? You're right. We do learn out from the face of the cherubs. We do learn out from there. We don't learn out from the face of Isaac like we thought before. Rather, he does learn out this Gzera Shava. This tool that he uses. Oh, face. He does learn out from the cherubs, but that cherub, we know the cherubs were 1 tefach. So in conclusion, basically, again, he said that when it talks about the cover of the ark, it says the word face. How big is his face? He learns out from the cherubs, which were a tefach big, a tefach tall, and that was based on the tradition that they had. And that's how big they were. Okay, period. So now we know, back to the big conclusion is, so now we know that the ark itself with its cover was 10 tefachim, and God never came down lower than the ark. It says he spoke from on top of the ark, meaning that God was 10 tefachim away, 10 hambras away. That shows us what significant amount of space is 10 hambras. Okay. Now the Gemara digresses for a second, and it says, what's this whole idea of a cherub? What is this word? Kruvim, in Hebrew. So Rabbi Bo, he answers that I'm going to use the word the Hebrew pronunciation because it's important for this. He says it's kiravya. It's in Hebrew it's kruvim. It's a kruv, so it's kiravya. Ravya in Babylonian was a child. So kiravya is like a child, meaning that the kruvim look like children. Yeah, look like human children, like the faces at least. They look like human children. That's why it was called a chud. So Abaye challenges him and he says, seemingly there's a different verse, not talking about the ark, talking about one of the prophet's visions of the angels above. And it says there was the first face was the face of a cherub, of a cherub, and the second face was the face of a man. So what does that show us? He says that it shows us that a cherub and a man are two different things. Yeah, if they were the same thing, you wouldn't say the first one was like this and the second one was like that. If you're saying the first one was, you're saying that the first one was different than the second one, and one was a human and one was a cherub. So seemingly, you can't say a cherub is a human face, a childlike face, because that was the first angel that he saw. The second one was a cherub. So the Gemara answers right away, no. When it says that one was a cherub and one was a human, one was a person, it means one was an adult person. When it says person, it means an adult person, and a cherub, it means a child. Like, so it's talking about they were very similar, just different in size. One looked like an adult face and one looked like a child face. So in the end of the day, the conclusion is that it does fit to say that a kruvim comes from the word ravya, child, that it looked like a child. Okay, that was a side point about once we spoke about the cherubs. So we wanted to know where this word cherub came from. So we said it's like a child. And we took away a challenge that went against it. Okay, so far we have a conclusion. Everything's very nice. We know that the ark was 10 hambras, including its cover. So that's how we know a sukkah has to be a minimum of 10 hambras, because that's a significant amount of space. What's going to happen now is the Gemara is going to throw all of that away. We literally, this was like a full double-sided page of Gemara, like getting to this conclusion. But the Gemara is going to throw it out soon. Why? So the Gemara says like this. If you base on the Mishnah, we're not going to get to it now because not everyone learned the Mishnah, but based on the Mishnah, we know that when it talks about a sukkah having to be 10 hambras high, it means 10 hambras besides for the schach. Now we spoke about the schach. Schach is referring to the cover of a sukkah. That's where like you put the branches and stuff. That's the main part of the sukkah we spoke about. That's where sukkah is called sukkah because of the schach. It's the same word, samach, chaf, sukkah, schach. It's the same word. That's the main part of the sukkah, the schach, the rooftop, the roof part. And it's known that a sukkah, when it has to be 10 hambras, it's referring to the ear space of the sukkah is 10 hambras. But then and on top of that, you put the schach. Not that the schach is part of the 10 hambras, rather you have to have 10 hambras besides for the rooftop. You have to have 10 hambras of ear space. That's what you need. So the Gemara, the Talmud is asking, very nice, you brought me this whole thing from the ark, but according to that, the schach would be part of the 10 hambras. Where do we know this idea that the schach has to be higher than the 10 hambras? You need 10 hambras of airspace. If you think about it, the ark we said was 9 tefach and 9 handbreadths tall. The cover, we figured out finally, we got to that conclusion that it was a handbreadth, but that's including the cover. You have the ark and the cover was 10. So to a sukkah, according to this logic, would be 9 handbreadths plus the schach could be a 10, and the schach doesn't need to be higher than 10. So So that's why the Gemara feels like we have to figure, we have to cancel everything we said before and find a new source for a sukkah being 10 handbreadths tall. So that's the next journey. This also won't be so smooth, so easy, but we're gonna go for it. Here we go. So this is something important piece of knowledge to know. And when the Jews were in the desert, they had something called the Mishkan, which was the tabernacle. That was something that they put up and took apart every time they traveled. And the point I'm bringing out, it was pretty small-ish for sure, compared to the temple. The actual temple itself, in dimensions, was way bigger than the tabernacle they had in the desert. Now that's significant because we're going to say soon that the cherubs were always proportionate to how big the room that they were in was. Yeah, the ark was always placed in the Holy of Holies. And based on how big that room was, how tall it was, that's how big the cherubs were. So in the temple, where it was significantly bigger, we're going to see it was triple the height of the tabernacle. So the cherubs had to be triple the height of what it was in the tabernacle. We're going to kind of backtrack based on what the height was in the temple. We're going to say, oh, so it must be that this is what was their height in the tabernacle. And why is that significant to know? Because when it describes the wings of these cherubs, of these angel-looking children, and angelic children, it says the wings hovered above the ark. That's what it says. Now, the word it uses when it talks about hovering above the ark, it uses the same word as sukkah. Let me just let's check the actual word. Give me 1 second. It says seichechim. Seichechim. The wings that were spread out, the cherub's wings that were spread out were seichechim, which is the same word again, samachaf. It's like same word as sukkah, schach. It was seichechim with their wings above the cover of the ark. So it uses that. So what we learn from that is that that's what a sukkah is. This idea of seichech, to have this amount of airspace between. So based on how tall the cherubs were, we know how much space there was from the top of the ark, because that's where the cherub's form of the body started from. Yeah, it was built on the cover of the ark. So from the top of the cover until the wings, that's called seichechim. That's when you have something called schach. So if we know how tall the cherubs were, we'll know how much airspace you need for a sukkah. Yeah. For now, that's what we think. So again, what we're going to do now is we're going to figure out how big the cherubs were, how tall they were in the tabernacle, and based on that, we'll say, oh, the wings were over that amount of space, and that will tell us what a schach seichim, how tall that is. So it says like this based on the verses. I'm not going to read them right now, but the temple, the height of the Holy of Holies, or the temple in general, which includes that room, was 30 cubits high, which is very high, but it was 30 cubits high. Now, so because of that, it was known that the cherubs were always a third. They were always a third of the height. So if the room was 30 cubits, so the cherubs were 10 cubits. Okay. Right, but that's not what we need to know. But the point is that was the fact. So based on that fact that it was 10 cubits, because the temple height was 30 cubits. So now we bring it back to the tabernacle. We say, oh, how tall was the tabernacle? So how do we know how tall it was? We know based on the beams. Yeah, the beams were held up the curtains. So based on how high the beams were, that's how high the tabernacle was. How high were the beams? The beams were 10 cubits tall. So if the two beams were 10 cubits, that means the tabernacle was 10 cubits tall. Now, what's a third of 10 cubits? So we're not going to go into cubits now because we were really working with handbreadths the whole time. Like a sukkah has to be 10 handbreadths. So let's find out like I mentioned before, how much is a cubit? We said it's 6 handbreadths. So 10 cubits is 10 times 60, 10 times 6 is 60. So the tabernacle, we're converting it from cubits to handbreadths. It was 60 handbreadths tall. So we know that the cherubs were a third of that. What's a third of 60? 20. So the cherubs were 20. The height of the cherubs were 20 handbreadths high. Now we already know, at least that's why it's helpful, that all the math we did before with figuring out the size of the ark is going to be helpful for this. We know that the ark was 10 handbreadths, 9 for the actual ark, 1 for the cover, which we figured out that it was a tefach tall. So 10 of the tvachim, 10 of the handbreadths were used for the ark. So how much is left for the cherubs? 10 handbreadths. And it says that their wings were above that. So, and they were schaching, so to speak, above that. So from here we see that for a sukkah needs to be 10 handbreadths. Again, the cherub's wings were 20 handbreadths high, but only 10 handbreadths at the top of the ark because the ark itself was 10. So that shows us that the idea of schach are 10 handbreadths. And 10 handbreadths of airspace because the wings were above the cherubs. So Gemara asked right away, 1 second. How do we know that the wings were above the 10 handbreadths? Maybe the way the Gemara describes it is that maybe the wings were like with its height. Yeah, you could hold out your hands like this, for example, and it'll be the same height as your head. Who said the wings were above the heads of the cherubs? Who said that? That's the Gemara asks. The Gemara doesn't let anything go. You can't pull any fast ones over here. So, so right away they answer that it doesn't say anywhere that the it says that there's it says the words on high. Sorry, it says the word lamaila in Hebrew. It's lamaila. It's on high, which means that it was high. When it talks about the wings, it says it was on high, which means that the wings were higher. They were above something. They were above the cherubs, not equal height to it, but above it. Lamaila, higher than it. So the Gemara says, oh, well, once you're saying that it was higher, maybe it was significantly higher. Who said it was exactly slightly higher? Maybe it was, I don't know, cubits higher than the cherubs. The wings were higher than the cherubs. Who said that they were just above it? How do you know that? So similar to the principle we keep on saying, we always choose the minimum amount, right? So if it says it was higher, we're going to assume it was slightly higher. How would we know if it was significantly higher? So the Gemara says, if it would have said lamaila, yeah, like 2 times this word on high and high, which would imply that it's significantly higher, it's much higher, then we would know that we're not just talking about slightly above. But if it just uses this word lamaila, then this word it was above it. We have to assume it was just above it. We can't assume anything more based on the principle we keep on mentioning the whole time. So that was just we had an objection to what we said, and then we clarified everything. So in short, seemingly everything is good right now. How do we know a sukkah has to be 10 handbreadths high and 10 handbreadths of airspace? How do we know that? From the cherubs. It says the wings were schaching, so to speak, above the ark. We figured out that there was 10 handbreadths between the cover of the ark and the wings. So now we know a sukkah has to be 10 handbreadths, and then you put the schach on top of that. Okay, very seemingly everything's okay. No, it's not. Why not? Why not? So the reason is like this. I pulled the fast one on you guys. When I told you that how much is a cubit? 6 handbreadths. Yeah, that's why we knew that the tabernacle was 60 handbreadths and the ark is 10 based on that. But it's not so simple, like anything in the Talmud. There's really an argument about how long or tall is a cubit, is a amma. So everything we said until now fits with the opinion of Rav Meir. Rav Meir, he holds that whenever it says the word cubit in the Torah, it's referring to a 6 handbreadth cubit. But there is another opinion. His name is Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Judah. We actually had him in the Mishnah earlier. he argues. Him and Rameir always argue, not literally, but I'm saying like they live in the same time, and so they had a lot of disagreements about certain laws. It's actually a term. It's called bar plukta. You ever heard of bar mitzvah? So bar mitzvah means a person that has mitzvahs. He's obligated to do the mitzvahs. That's the whole idea of the bar mitzvah. So bar plukta means argument. So bar plukta means like his argument guy, So people have like it's a term that's used like, oh, so you would say our mayor's bar plukta was Rabbi Yehuda, like the guy he always argued with was Rabbi Yehuda. So here you see that example where a mayor's arguing with Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that it depends what you're talking about. Then that would tell you if the cubit is 6 or 5 hambras. What does he say? He says, when it comes to the building, the actual structure of the building of the temple or the tabernacle, they were 6 hambras. The cubit was 6 hambras. But when you talk about the vessels of the temple or the tabernacle, those were only 5 hambras tall or long. So how would that apply to us? But why does that ruin what we said before? Because based on Rabbi Yehuda's math, let's do the math again. It says that the ark was a cubit and a half tall. How much is a cubit according to Rabbi Judah, according to Rabbi Yehuda? It's 5 hambras. So now an amma and a half. So 1 amma is 5. Half of a amma is 2.5. So that's 7.5 hambras tall. Then we have to stick to what we said before, that the cover of the ark was a hambra. So the total is 7.5 plus 1 of the cover is 8.5 hambras. So the ark is only 8.5 hambras, but the tabernacle itself, we said, was 60. Because remember, when it comes to the structure, even Rabbi Yehuda says that it's 6 sfachim, 6 hambras. So the structure of the tabernacle, the walls of the tabernacle was 10 cubits, which is 60 hambras. And we said a third of that is where the cherubs finished. So if the cherubs finished, still, like we said, 20 hambras, how much space was there between the ark and the top of the cherubs? Or how tall were the cherubs, based on what we just said? You have to, I guess you could do the math on different ways, but 20 minus 8.5 of the ark is 11.5. So the cherubs must have been 11.5 hambras tall, according to Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rameir, the cherubs were 10, and everything works. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the holes of the ark was shorter. A cubit of a vessel is shorter than a regular cubit. So then the cherubs must have been 11.5 hambras tall, which is significant. Which is taller. So according to that, a sukkah should have to be 11.5 hambras tall, which would ruin everything we've been saying until now. So now we're stuck again. So the answer is, now this is going to be the kind of like the final answer. And I think maybe we could finish off with this because it's going to get into a lot of new laws that are going to be hard to just run through. So the answer is that, you know what? Forget about everything we said. Forget about everything we said. How do we know a sukkah has to be 10 hambras and that it's hollow? It has to be 10, like hollow, so to speak, 10 hambras of ear space. It was all passed down as tradition. The word Gemara actually means tradition. That's where the word Gemara comes from. Everything that was written, everything was oral. It was passed down generation to generation. And then the Talmud was when it was written down. So the Gemara is the written down version of the tradition. Yeah, that's what the word Gemara means. So it says the Hebrew word it says is a Gemirla, Hilchas Gemirla. He had it passed down halacha, a law from Moshe at Sinai. He was passed down from generation to generation. And how tall does a sukkah need to be? 10 hambras. No verse, no nothing, no math, no everything. You throw everything away we learned until now. It's all not relevant to this discussion, even though they could be true. It's all not relevant to the discussion. It was just passed down that a sukkah is 10 hambras of ear space, and that's it, according to Rabbi Yehuda. That is how the Gemara finishes off. Now, I just want to. I'll give you up for next time. I really don't want to get into it. It's going to take a significant amount of time. I'll just show you why it's going to take time. Basically, the Gemara says that when it comes to what was passed down, it wasn't only a sukkah. There's 3 categories of laws that it says were passed down from Moshe, and even though they're not written in the Torah about these things, about the specifics of these laws, it was always passed down. And we spoke about it already once, one of the first times we sat down here. We can talk about another time about the whole idea of the written Torah and the oral Torah, but they complement each other. And if something was only part of the oral Torah, it's still part of the conclusion, the result of the law itself, and nothing really changed. It has the same significance. And what were the 3 categories? It says chatzitzin, shiurim, chatzitzin, and mechitzin. What does that mean? Shiur means a measurement. So let's say, for example, Yom Kippur. We're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. What's the amount to be chayiv, the punishment, to be guilty of the punishment of Yom Kippur, which we're not going to get into now? There's a certain size. It says if I remember correctly, it's not a dried fig. It's a dried. I can't remember right now. Whatever. It's a certain amount. To be guilty of getting the punishment of eating in Yom Kippur, it's a certain amount. I'm just giving you an example where there's amounts. Amounts make a difference. Yeah, how much kiddush do you have to drink on Shabbat? I don't know. How much matzah do you have to eat on Passover? These are all in the category of shiurim, of the sizes, amounts. So that's one thing that was passed down from Moshe Rabbeinu. How much is significant? What's a significant amount for each specific category of law? That was passed down. You don't find it written anywhere in the Torah itself. It's all oral. Next thing is chatzitzin. Chatzitzin are, how do they translate here in English? Interpositions, which basically means things that are, I'm not trying to use the Hebrew word, but I need the English word. It's you're not, let's say, I'm just talking about the case. For example, when it comes to going to mikvah, someone going to mikvah, or when you're putting vessels in the mikvah, anything that's going to mikvah. There's laws of chatzitzin. There can't be anything getting in between the water and whatever is going in the mikvah, whether it's a person or a vessel. For example, let's say I'm wearing a watch. If I go into the mikvah with my watch, so the watch is a chatzitza. It's something that's separating the water part of my body and the water. So, and there's all the specific laws. The Gemara is going to talk about this all later. That's what I'm saying, why it's going to be hard, because all these different laws that new laws we're going to have to jump into. Gemara asks, what was oral about this? What was oral about that? And so we'll talk about that next time. I'm just trying to give you the general idea. So that's chatzitzin. Again, chatzitzin are interpositions, meaning things that are getting in the way between the water and whatever is going in the mikvah. The next category are mechitzin, a mechitza. Yeah, you might have heard the word mechitza. The synagogue has a mechitza. And what's a mechitza? It's a partition. It means a wall. Not literally a wall, but that idea of some sort of structure, coming up from the ground. That's a mechitza. And that comes into many things. When it comes to sukkah, it comes to on Shabbos with Erevs and things like that. What is a mechitza? Yeah, what is a size of these structures that you need? This also was all passed down from Moshe in an oral way. It wasn't written down in the Torah itself. Now, where does sukkah come into these 3 categories? Michael, you want to guess which one? Which one of these 3 categories does the sukkah come into?
I would guess it would have to. One, partitions because of the height, of anything. Mm-hmm. But I guess I could make an argument for with the schach, why in a position,
okay, right, that's true.
Could be relevant.
Okay, so very good. Yeah, well, and you could even use the first one also, the size. Yeah. How much, there's a mitzvah to eat in the sukkah. How much do you have to eat in the sukkah? That's also so when it comes to laws of sukkah, I'm sure all 3 come into play, but with regards to what we're talking about specifically, Michael said that when it comes to partitions, we're talking about how tall sukkah has to be. In other words, how tall do the walls of a sukkah have to be? That's in other words what we're saying, and that was all passed down. These three categories. Now, what we're going to do for the next bit, not this time, next time, is going to go through. The Talmud is going to go through what exactly was necessary to be passed down orally. What was not written in the Torah already about these three categories. And it's gonna go through that, each one of them. I'm trying to see, I want to make sure if this is me to end. So that's in a certain sense we finished something today. What we finished was, how do we know a sukkah has to be 10 tvachim, 10 handbreadths of ear space, and for that we have a conclusion. According to Rav Meir, it's based on the cherubs and everything. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, and it could be Rav Meir agrees with this, it was something that was passed down. We have no way to prove it from the actual Torah itself, the written Torah, but it was passed down that the size of a sukkah is 10 handbreadths. That's the conclusion. That's that. I want to, again, like, one of the things I want to leave with these classes is always like tools for your toolbox. So meaning that the goal isn't only to learn this page, but I want you to be able to be familiar with, when you read other pages of Gemara on your own, you're like, okay, I know what that is. I know what's happening here. Things like that, to get used to some of the Gemara way of thinking and some of the tools that the Gemara will use. So for today, what comes to mind, Michael, you can add anything else that you feel like I should add. First of all, the principle we already learned last time of when you're unsure, it's not clear what the size is, you always choose the smaller size. Never, the principle is not to overreach. It's better to underreach than to overreach. The way it was described is like, it's, if you take too much, then people are going to have to take whatever you took extra away from you. So better to take less, and if they need to add to you, they'll add that to you. But you'll never have something taken away from you. That's like the example that's given. But the idea is, again, you never take more, never assume the more, always assume the less. That's one principle. Another principle we learned today was the idea of Gzera Shava, which means the idea of when you have two similar words in two different verses, if it was passed down that you could learn out from the similarity of the words, we learn out certain laws from one verse to another.
Just a quick question on
Yeah.
that. Is there a list or a codification of these words that are considered, these are Zer Shava, and these are, no, you can't apply it there?
So unfortunately not. Like I mean, we spoke about this once already, that everything was oral. It was meant to be oral. It was not meant to be written down. So it's almost like we're grateful for everything that is written down. So it was always passed down what words are open for it, but there's no book, that we have today that are. But the point is that anytime you do see in the Talmud that, then you like, someone can make a list of what words were actually used. I don't know if we can make a list of what words were open to it, but we can definitely have a list of what words were used for it. And so that's another major principle, Gzera Shava, that it comes up very common, very often in Gemara. We're trying to learn out something from the Torah. What is it referring to? It's not clear. So we say, oh, look at the other verse. It has the same word. And just like in that verse, it means something. So too here, like over here in this case, what did we do? We said, it says face. We don't know what type of face it's referring to, human or bird or this or that. We said, oh, based on another verse, based on the verse of the cherubs, and we know a cherub's face was a tefach, was a handbreadth. So too, the face of the cover of the ark was also a tefach. That's another major principle that we're learning out from here. I guess one, like, I want to call it a principle, but one thing we see is that a lot of the laws, when it comes to sizes and amounts, those were mostly orally passed down. You won't necessarily see in the Torah, Torah says you're not allowed to eat Yom Kippur. It doesn't say how much you're not allowed to eat. Like, these things are things that were passed down orally.
I think that is one of the other principles you had talked about in the past, and that is, even though there may be some great and clever arguments going back and forth, it seems that the farther back you can go, the more the longer lived the tradition is. That is going to be the principle, the this case, we may not know all of the rationales for
Exactly.
these sizes, but if they were handed down Doraita or from Moses in one or another version,
Exactly.
that's going to trump the others.
Exactly. Michael's bring up a very important point that that when it comes to these traditions that were passed down all the way from Moses at Mount Sinai, they have the same level of truth or reliance, etc. That as if it was written in the Torah. They're the same. They have the same impact on Jewish law. And you can't and what Michael was saying is you can't ask a question, a logical question on something something that was passed down. Just like the Torah would say, you have to sleep in a sukkah. Like, oh, you have to eat in a sukkah. Like, who said? Why do I have to eat in a sukkah? Maybe this. You can start giving me logic. No, the Torah wrote that. That's what you have to do. Like it's something in Hebrew we call it Xeris HaKasam. It's just a decree from God. Like this is what it is. It's not about the logic. So too in what Michael is saying is so too with all these traditions that were passed down. You can't ask a question like, oh, it doesn't make sense logically. This was the tradition, and it's as if it was written in the Torah itself. And therefore, let's say for here, we said a sukkah has to be 10 hambras, excluding the schach. Like you can start maybe asking me questions. Maybe a person needs a higher sukkah, a lower sukkah, this, that. No, that was the passed down size from Hashem. So there's no questions asked. It's like as if God told you himself, this is the size, and there's nothing to ask about it.
Yeah, just so there's no misunderstanding, Michael was not clever enough to make that observation on his own. This is something that Rabbi Tani taught a few weeks ago. So I'm just carrying that out.
Thank you. Amazing. Yeah. So Gloria, thanks for joining. Michael, thanks for coming. I love, thank you for the feedback. Yes. So we'd love to, when you can join. Gloria is saying that she's in her home in Maryland now, so she can't join in person. But thank you so much for joining. And definitely the goal, I know with Corona, COVID, it's been a lot of Zoom classes, but the goal is to bring it back.
I mentioned a PDF that you sent to me is very easy to use on the pad, so no problem.
Yeah, so I'm gonna send you you email, you sent it in the chat box your email, so I'm gonna use that. I'm going to send you the text so you can know for next time. And like Michael was saying, he uses it on his iPad. Is that a Kindle or iPad?
This is the iPad, but I right now loading it on. I loaded it on to the Kindle.
Got it. So
I'm
even
using the Kindle
so
on
a Kindle, it's for sure going to be very easy to use. But even on the iPad, it really puts it in a way that's very easy to read. Sets up the notes and everything very easily. So it'll be very easy to read. So I'll be sending that to you.
And I can make the font big.
Yeah, Michael loves the fact that he can make the font big on his iPad. Thank you so much for joining, Gloria. I'd love to be with you next week. I do want to say that we have now that I'm back. I was in Aruba for a bit. Now that we're back, I kind of have like a blitz of different classes going on. So I just want to give myself some shout out. There's also Tanya class. A Tanya class starting on Monday. It actually is going to be very interesting stuff, reality changing stuff. So feel free to join. We're starting Monday, but it's talk about the unity of God, and we're gonna have practical lessons also from it. But yeah, alrighty, have an amazing Shabbos.